Defenders of the Earth. I understand this was your first big break in directing and producing,
right. Yeah.
Although you have supervised animation in Korea before.
Right, on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Do you remember the day you knew you were going to be working with such an amazing gallery of characters, of classic characters?
I think it was 83 or something, or 84. I'd have to look at a date, but I remember the crew, and I remember, I certainly remember my office and everybody I was working with, and all the good time I had working on that show, because that was just really fun. And the development of it, because King Features was directly involved. They wanted their characters done right. The only problem was, they wanted to update Flash Gordon's uniform, because for me, I would have gone with the old Buster Crabbe thing with the lightning bolt on the chest and stuff. But then again, Flash was a character who changed costumes a lot. When he was on Mongo, he would dress sometimes in royalties costuming. Other times he'd wear the more military stuff with the lightning bolts and stuff on the chest. So that was okay. And I still got to do Flash Gordon, because I ended up doing the final designs on pretty much everybody in the show except Lothar. And that was Will Mineo. He did Lothar's final design. But yes, that was a pure pleasure doing that show and getting to draw characters like the Phantom and Flash Gordon and Mandrake. And we had some real fun developing that, where they gave us free rein to try out different things. And we went back and tried some old movie star looks on certain characters, particularly William Powell as Mandrake the Magician. And they wouldn't go for it, but it really looked great. I mean, he fit that character so. Are you familiar with William Powell?
Yeah. There was a lot of talent involved in the show, and then I understand that you had and still have a very close relationship with Will Mineo that you already mentioned. That you started you started simultaneously in Godzilla.
And he helped. He was the head guy helping develop that. I was kind of his second in command on that, and we were both doing a lot of the artwork for it. But Will stepped away from Defenders of the Earth pretty much after it just got started to do Jim, I think was what he jumped on next. Because Marvel was doing a lot of stuff at that point. They were doing G.I. Joe and Transformers and My Little Pony, and I believe Muppet Babies was somewhere in there too. So it was a pretty big studio at that moment. And Defenders of the Earth was kind of an extra project. So there was a lot of talent involved in it, and a lot of people that came in from comics wanted to work on it. People like Nestor Redondo and Nick Cuddy and Mike Sikowski and people like that.
Yeah, I must confess that although I consider myself an hardcore fan of the series, I wasn't aware of the art of Nestor Redondo until I started seeing some posts Will put on Facebook of Nestor's artwork, and I started exploring.
He's great.
Awesome.
Yeah, he's great.
Artwork.
Yeah, I've got a really nice piece that he did, a poster that drawing that this is just the black and white that he just did on paper, but it's in ink. It's an ink drawing of all the characters, and then it was turned into a color painted piece. I believe Nestor even painted it, and it's just a lovely piece of drawing. He was just one of the most skilled draughtsmen I've ever run into in my entire life. I put him up there with a Hal Foster or a Joe Kubert or somebody like that, who's just their drafting and draughtsmanship is just amazing.
As a fan of Hal Foster, you had a chance to bring Prince Valiant to the Defenders of the Earth universe.
I grabbed that script.
How do you remember?
They were doing it, yeah. I grabbed that script because I was a huge Prince Valiant fan. In fact, my wife's name is Alita, which is Valiant's wife's name. And she was actually named after the character in the comic strip, even though her parents were never fans of comics. They knew who Princess Alita was. So that's where she got her name.
Fantastic. And what are the best memories you have from this production?
Well, it has to be the Prince Valiant show, because I got top talent on every sequence that was boarded. I boarded one myself. Don Manuel boarded one sequence, and Mitch Schauer boarded a sequence. And Mitch is, again, one of these guys who's just an elegantly superb artist. He just can draw anything really well. And I got just great storyboards out of it and designs by Nestor Redondo. Nestor designed Valiant and Alita and Arn for me. And of course, Valiant looks just like he does if Hal Foster had been drawn. It was wonderful. So I had a really talented crew working on it. It was really fun, even though it was a science fiction-y, magic-based thing, which Valiant really wasn't. Even though there were more moments in the Valiant strip where there was seeming sorcery. He never really said, no, there's magic going on here. It was almost thought to be a trick of the eye, illusion, that sort of thing. But this was actual, sword and sorcery adventure stuff. But who could care? It was Prince Valiant. I got to put Prince Valiant in animation for the first time.
There is an entire episode and some promotional materials that have been done in a completely different style. I'm recalling The Root of Evil. I believe it was the 6th episode to be aired here. I don't know the order in the US, but I remember that I was scared as a kid and thought, I hope they don't change the series now, because it's...
I know that one.
Cool,
I just don't recall whether I directed that one, just because we were all moving so quickly. But that one I know of because I believe I have art for the title card. Is that the one with the giant worm creature and stuff in it?
No, it's one about one friend of Mandrake's, a scientist that discovers a medicine that creates roots from his hands and his feet, and they have to discover a root in. I'm
gonna have to go back and watch it.
In the Phantom, the style is completely the style is completely different. And I remember I thought, okay, they will probably change, but I liked the other style, the one that remained. I liked it better. But
that show was. Oh, go ahead.
It was only one episode. The story was interesting, and in hindsight, the art was not bad at all. It's interesting art. And I came to think that it was a pilot episode, but
it might have been, because I know it was done early on. I have to tell you that the show was being done so fast that those kinds of things were bound to crop up. In fact, we felt more fortunate than in the end than what we deserved, because some of that stuff was really being pushed through quickly, especially in the animation. We were getting pretty much our regular amount of time in production, but the animation end was just grueling for those kids, because I think that was being done by the studio in Korea that ended up doing The Simpsons years later.
It always intrigued me, even as a kid. I collected these pocket calendars, trading cards, and for example, this illustration, I don't know if you can...
Yeah, I believe that's E.R. Cruz.
It's completely different, because we have Jeddah with a completely different look, Kashin with a different look, Rick. These
were early designs. Yeah. In fact,
more like
this might be a compiled drawing. That is, this might be various drawings that were just laid one on top of another to create a composition.
I only wanted to try to shed some light on this, because it has been one of those childhood mysteries for me.
Oh, I know the feeling. Yeah, every once in a while I come across something that I go, oh, that sparks a childhood memory. I did it just the other day. I came across an issue of Tales to Astonish that Jack Kirby had drawn, this thing called The Crawling Creature, and I went, oh God, I remember as a kid this just sparked my imagination. It creeped me out, and I read it over and over and over because it was just so fascinating to me. It had that element of Ray Harryhausen to it, and I loved Ray Harryhausen monsters.
The Real Ghostbusters is also one of those cartoons that will remain forever in the 80s cultural landscape. How was the experience with Dick and working with this particular property?
Not great. I never liked working for Dick very much. I did some things for them, but I only did a few things on Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters, I liked the movies, and I thought the cartoon show was well done. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And again, I think I was working on other things at the time. Wasn't that the late 80s?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was probably at DC Comics most of the time at that point. So when I was doing storyboards, they were strictly side jobs. But it was being produced by Will Mineo, so that was one of the reasons I jumped in here. Will and I just always worked well together.
In 1989, you have returned to the XMen.
Right, which was really fun.
The Pride of the XMen, how was that experience that would kickstart the whole series, as I understand?
Well, that was probably the best overall animation experience I ever had, because Marvel was at a point where they needed something to kickstart the studio. Everything was drying up on them and they didn't have much left. And Margaret Lesh called Will and Larry and I in and said, look, you guys have been pestering us about the X-Men for years. Can you do a pilot for us? Can you get, we've got Larry Parr who'll be your writer, and you can collaborate with Stan and see what you come up with. And we went, well, of course, we'd love to do that. And we had the meeting with Stan and quickly realized that he thought we'd be doing the original X-Men, Angel and Cyclops and the Beast and Marvel Girl and Iceman. And we said, no, it's not who they are now, Stan. They're basically Storm and Wolverine and Nightcrawler with Cyclops in there, and the Beast shows up once in a while. But that's not the core group anymore. And his attitude was, well, you guys seem to know what you do. Why don't you just go wing it? So we went, really? And it was like, oh boy, we got all the toys and we got the playroom too. So we worked with Larry Parr and we crafted a script that we hoped would introduce an audience to these characters as fully as possible and try to avoid an origin story because they're so damn boring. And with the X-Men, where do you go with an origin story? I don't even know how that works. It just doesn't seem to be possible to me. You just have to say that there's this guy who's been bringing kids into his school that have special abilities, and that's kind of the most you need to do about that. So we approached it from a concept that I and Will and Larry have always liked, this idea of it being seen from a child's point of view, and Kitty Pryde was perfect for that. I always loved a show growing up called The Rifleman, which was a show about a guy who had a special sharpshooting, fast-shooting rifle, repeating rifle in the Old West, and him and his son had a farm that they lived on, and they were basically farmers, but he was well known as this gunfighter too, who protected this town he lived in. But the whole thing was seen from the son's point of view, which made it really easy to access the heroic abilities of this man. You could say, oh yeah, I get it. The son sees him like this. And it was created by Sam Peckinpah, in fact. It was just a great show. So we decided Kitty Pryde would be our point of view character, and we brought in the main characters, Colossus and Storm, Nightcrawler, Wolverine. Who else did we have in there? I think we might have had a couple of extraneous characters. I can't think of what her name is, that disco superhero that was popular at the time too.
Dazzler, exactly.
I think Dazzler was in there. Anyway, we decided to show what mutants were and make it Magneto and his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants versus the X-Men. And this is the way we developed the whole thing. And when we had the story written, we made it real clear to Larry Parr. We didn't want any funny animals. We didn't want any goofy sidekicks. We wanted a show a lot like Johnny Quest. So that's the way we approached the show. And when I was the one who got to do the recording sessions as director with of course an actual voice director, but to direct what I wanted from the characters and to help and to cast it. So the only problem I ran into was Marvel Comics insisted that, and this came from Jim Shooter directly with a few other people, that Wolverine had to be an Australian because they were going to reveal that he came from Australia, which turned out to be a red herring that was given to us. It really wasn't going on. And we feel like later this was because Marvel was left out of this production and they weren't happy about it. So we fell for it and we cast an Australian voice for that. Other than that, I got everything I wanted out of it. I got John Stevenson to play Professor X, who he had been the second Dr. Quest in the Johnny Quest original series. And once we'd finished the recording sessions, and we did it all in a day, all the actors went, "Wow, that was fun. We have never done a serious superhero show like this before. There weren't any, goofy characters or funny animals or anything." And they said that was really fun to do a serious show. So we gave them the film, and it sat around for a couple of years being shown, and Fox was interested once they started Fox Kids. But that changed really quickly when Margaret Lesh became the head of Fox Kids, and she wanted this property done and done right. So she brought Will and Larry in, and they wanted me, but I'd moved up to Seattle at that point. So I agreed to be the character designer on the show. And I did storyboards after that. But Margaret saw that this show got made, and it was a huge hit, as everybody knows. We were kind of shocked ourselves because we did the show as well as we could, but the animation wasn't great. We knew that. But that didn't seem to matter because when the show started airing, because it aired about 6 months to a year after Batman, the animated series, began, we were beating them in the ratings every week. And that was shocking to us because we all knew how good Batman was. It was a really good series. And it was done the way I had envisioned an animated superhero series should be done. Simple, with the voice acting carrying the characters, and simply animated. And this is something that I know that Bruce Timm and his folks got from watching the Flash or Superman cartoons. Simple design, and even though they had much better animation back in the day. And the Batman series knew that their animation wouldn't be great like ours, but they did that by simplifying the characters and simplifying what was going on and letting a lot of the character work be carried by great voice actors. But we still beat them every week for a long time, and the show was a huge hit.
And one of the things that seems to be of extreme importance in animation shows is the opening themes, and the X-Men certainly has one of the most memorable opening themes ever.
People love it. I'm not nuts about it personally, but people
There's
love
about
it.
1 million versions of it. So
There is. There's rock and roll versions of it. There's symphonic versions of it. I'm just kind of amazed how much people love it. In fact, the show itself, when I started working at one of the last regular gigs I did before I retired, was I started working at 343 from Microsoft on Halo, the game Halo, and as their cinematic storyboard artist. And when the guys in the studio, the guys and the women in the studio all found out I'd worked on X-Men, oh my God, they just went nuts. They just thought, oh, that's the best cartoon show I ever had as a kid. They all just went nuts. And I just went, really? Oh, well, that's great. But, I just couldn't believe that all these really wonderful animators thought this was a terrific show because they were animating some pretty awesome stuff.
Captain Planet was probably the first children's show to merge superhero action with the centrality of an environmentalist message.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts regarding this show?
Oh, I thought it was a fun show. I worked a little bit on it. Will Mineo was the producer, and he worked directly with Ted Turner on this. This was Ted Turner's a baby. He really wanted to do something like this. And I like shows like that, but any show that's done with a message behind it kind of gets lost in the weeds as far as what is exciting and fun. There's always some message they have to push at the end of the show. And I don't know, those kind of things just, I never think they're going to last in the end. But Captain Planet did very well, and Will did a great job. He designed the character, and I think he worked with Neil Adams designing the character. In fact, Neil Adams did some of the original designs. And I liked the show, though. It was fun to work on because, once again, Will Mineo does a great production. He always finds a way to make fun with this stuff, and he loved the concept. So that makes it even better because he could make it a lovable production by doing that. But many times when people did shows like that, I'd always go, oh, this is grueling to sit through. But Captain Planet wasn't. It just was pleasant to watch.
As I think you understood by now, I could go on forever, but let's jump into more recent times. I understand that you had a blast doing the Avengers, Earth Mightiest Heroes.
That was
safe to say it was your favorite show in the last decade. What's so special?
One of my favorite shows, period. That was so well done. I liked a lot of the shows I worked on, and certainly I had experiences like helping to create the first XMen pilot, but Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes is just pure Marvel comics, and I loved it. Those guys were doing it exactly right, and they did the limited style animation, which they, Marvel for years kept pushing everybody to do detailed drawing stuff, and it always never was working for them, where these guys knew better. And it was Marvel was involved, and they said, you want it to look like Batman in the animated series, and we can give you that. And they did. It was really terrific. I thoroughly enjoyed every episode I worked on. I did as many of those as I could get. I was on staff for 2 seasons on that. That's all we got, damn it. Then they killed it and did Avengers Assemble, which was a takeoff on the movie version. And of course, those aren't as good as those original stories, which we were basing everything on.
Yeah. As someone with such a long and influential career, how do you see the transformations in the industry on the last decades? What do you think that we have gained and what we have lost?
I would say that a lot of the gains have been excellence in animation and design and storytelling have really come up. And I think that happened because after the 60s and 70s, there were guys like me coming into the business that wanted better than what we were seeing over those periods. And so we really pushed for it, particularly me in storyboard work and design work. And that was one of my things I focused on a lot. I wasn't an animator per se, but I wanted better animation. But that happened because of competition. You had shows cranking out a bunch of crap, badly animated series during the 80s, even though some of them were a lot of fun. But then you had companies come along like Warner Brothers that went, you know what? We can do some really nice animation and start kicking some butt here. And they did. They did, like the Tiny Toons and the Animaniacs and Freakazoid and Batman, the animated series. And after that, all those great shows like Superman, the animated series, and Justice League, and especially Justice League Unlimited. That was a stunningly good show. That had everything going for it. Well done animation, good design, great story direction, and incredible voice work. So we kept up in the game, and that's what made everybody compete, and that's what makes work get better.
As a creator, you were talking about the way that fans sometimes sometimes act like spoiled kids because they don't get what they want. And there's also this phenomena of criticism over the internet that seems to be completely out of hand. You never know until when you will be criticized on a certain character or a certain team. Things are politically, we're living through it seems a very complicated time to be creative.
I agree. It's totally, you're at the mercy of the people on the internet these days, and with what they think is good and bad. And if a group doesn't like what you're doing, you can take some pretty harsh criticism, and they can hurt people pretty badly. And I don't see the need for that, but that also speaks to the fact that there's a lot of people out there with a lot of anger and hatred in them, and they don't have any other way to express it because they're not creatives like you and I. We have a way to express ourselves. I can say things about my political leanings, but I don't go so far as to say, somebody's a terrible human being because they made a movie that I don't like. I may say that's not a film that I'm particularly happy with, but I very seldom would say something's a bad film. There's films I don't like. I don't like Fast and Furious films, but they're just not my cup of tea. I totally understand how well made they are, but they're just not things you're going to get me to sit down and watch. I've tried. I can't, I've watched 2 of them, and that was plenty for me.
It's very interesting to think that your work have touched so many people all around the world. But when we talk about, I think mostly the animation for TV, it's a very invisible work for most of the audience. In comic books, I don't think it's quite the same, because in comic books, I think that there is more attention to the authors and to the people behind the work. But in television, I think that many times the creators end up suffering of a little invisibility. So I wanted to ask you, how is your relationship with fans, with fans of the shows that you have worked with? Are you often contacted by fans? Are you surprised in any way with any kind of reaction or any kind of particular attention paid to a certain show or a certain work that you've done?
Yes, I do have a lot of fans, and that's something that has been a phenomena of Facebook in particular. I kind of stayed away from conventions and things for about 10 years because I was just tired of going to the same conventions over and over again. And I felt like not only was I getting bored, the audience was getting bored. So I decided to just step back. And then once I got on Facebook, I started going to more conventions and more out-of-town conventions, and realizing I had a pretty big fan base out there. So I ended up with a pretty regular commission group, and I found that there's tons of people out there who are interested in the work I've done. But I think that stems, like you're saying, from the fact I had high profile in comics. And even though I wasn't one of the big names in comics, I had a high profile because of doing comic work. And I had a high profile because of the things I worked on, XMen and XMen and the All-Star Squadron and things like that. Star Wars, did I say Star Wars? I probably did. That always comes up first. So anyway, that helped me a lot with finding out that there was a way to make a lot of, good connections with that. And I've reconnected with and connected with other professionals who I knew about that I hadn't known before personally. And that's been a real pleasure to get to know guys like Joe Rubenstein in particular, is a guy I like talking to a lot, and other people in the animation business as well. But you're right, and that there is some frustration among my friends among the animation business that they don't get as high a profile from the stuff they've worked on. And many times they've worked on really spectacular works. I mean, Tom Cito, you mentioned, he worked on so many great feature films. I mean, he's just a really terrific, talented guy. He should be more well known as an artist, but we get put in a category in movies where these days, how many names do you see at the end of a feature film? My gosh, there's just thousands of names. And it was never like that in older films, let's say the 50s, 60s, 70s, but they weren't giving credit to a lot of people either.